Hi everyone. Today we are in Scioto County, Ohio, near the former Scioto County Infirmary in West Portsmouth. So the Scioto County Infirmary has been a topic of my research for several years, and one of the interesting parts of that research, more than just the infirmary itself, is its burying grounds. And its current burying grounds reside in Earl Thomas Conley Park, also known as Riverside Park, which is maintained by the Scioto County Commissioners. Across US 52, which you'll see there just beyond the trees, is property that was once owned by Charlie Brown, which is now owned by the state of Ohio. It's more famously known for what lies at altitude, just here to our left, an area known as Raven Rock. Before Raven Rock, however, what you see way out there in what is Riverside Park or Earl Thomas Conley Park was the Scioto County Infirmary Farm. And its purpose was to generate revenue and resources for those that were being cared for by the Scioto County Commissioners. So just past the splash park is the current infirmary cemetery. Well, in researching the infirmary cemetery, I kept coming across stories that referenced the new infirmary cemetery being inundated by the flood of 1884. So the flood of 1884, obviously came up to US 52, and it would have inundated the small rise that is Riverside Park. The cemetery sits probably on about 6 feet of elevation gain from the upper field of the park. So it would have been flooded. That still floods sometimes. I believe the flood in 1996 or 97 flooded it. But it's the fact that it references it as the new infirmary cemetery. So since the infirmary was obviously in operation before 1884, and it's calling it the new infirmary cemetery, that would lead me to believe that there was an old infirmary cemetery. I'm really sorry for the traffic in the background. I'll try to speak up. So if there was an old infirmary cemetery, where would it be? Well, the WPA generated maps for the burials of veterans. Well, while it has locations of the veterans' burials, it's also great because it shows us where some of these more rural cemeteries are. And this one is very helpful because, as we can see, US 52 running vertically to the right of the gridded area, which is the old infirmary cemetery, and Carey's Run running horizontally across the top of the gridded area. Well, according to this, it shows that the infirmary cemetery is 168 feet north of US 52, and Carey's Run is approximately half a mile. So if we look down this way, that is Carey's Run, about a half mile down. It's also the infirmary set right at the juncture of Carey's Run and US 52. There's another cemetery there as well. Well, there's two cemeteries, Carey's Run Cemetery, and there's a family cemetery on the infirmary property. So, and here's US 52. So if this map is correct, and this is the final, this wasn't a draft, that puts the infirmary cemetery on the side of the road that we are currently on versus the new infirmary cemetery, which is across the road. What's also great is that it calls it the old infirmary cemetery, which at first you might overlook it because during its lifetime, it was called the old county home, the county home, the county infirmary, the county poorhouse. So seeing the word old in front of infirmary isn't really anything that would catch your attention, but old cemetery and then seeing mention of new cemetery is particularly important. So other pieces of information that lead us to think that this was it is that in burial notices in some papers, it mentions that the cemetery was in an old apple orchard. Especially there's a story about a Mr. Mustard, whose story would be told being buried in an apple orchard in a corner of the Scioto County Infirmary farm. There's stories of two gentlemen who died of tuberculosis who were buried in the swamp cemetery. So that bit of information is extremely helpful, especially since they predate 1884. Try to walk up here away from all this traffic. But the current infirmary cemetery across the highway isn't a swamp. It's actually well drained. Unless it's the most inundated weather conditions causing it to flood, it stays relatively dry. However, as we walk up, we're approximately 168 feet, 170 feet. Since this photograph of the map was taken from the larger map maintained by the Scioto County Recorder's Office, don't really have an accurate scale. They do show that it is approximately 0.4 of an acre, so almost half an acre. And then on our scale, we have 20 feet to 1 inch. So at 20 feet to 1 inch, we can see that this would go from off of US 52, 168 feet to right, an embankment, and then approximately 200 feet. But as we walk across, we went ahead and put boundary markers, temporary boundary markers, so we can kind of get our bearings for the size. As we go across, we see that there is quite a bit of flooding and erosion along this higher bank, and that's most likely due to runoff on the steep elevation change. Now, this trail is currently used by Ohio Department of Natural Resources to access Raven Rock. So some of that erosion and water diversion has been remedied due to the trail creation. But before then, water, when it rained, would have just really came down here in torrents. And what's interesting is Raven Rock freestone is very abundant in this area, as well as shale and limestone. And with that as a bedrock and sediment settling on top along with clay deposits, with torrential rain coming off a steep elevation, what we can see in this area, as we see in other local areas, is that there are slips in the land. So one of the probable reasons that's speculated and not sourced by any type of evidence at all other than my own opinion is that sometime before 1884, the Scioto County Commissioners or the superintendent or the infirmary or the trustees of the infirmary saw that the former cemetery, the old infirmary cemetery, was in danger of being covered by a landslide or a landslip. So at least the markers were moved across the highway, and possibly also the bodies. Unfortunately, having looked at registers for county expenses and the bidding procedures for how that was conducted, I really can't see that with the amounts that were paid that work of moving persons was done. But again, unless it's proven otherwise, we'll just accept that that's what was done. But the purpose of today's video is to show what would have been the old county burial grounds. And it's one of the more trying parts of researching the infirmary is the changing terminology. So, we mentioned before that it was the county home, it was the county infirmary, it was the poorhouse, it was the house for the poor, it went by a lot of names, and it makes research kind of difficult, particularly when you get into older type fonts that optical character recognition, or OCR, doesn't really pick up that well. So it causes us for a lot of page by page reading if you want to find anything new about the infirmary. And with that same lexicon issue, trying to determine stories about some of the county's poorest people who may have only received 1 or 2 lines when they died, if they received any type of publication at all. They might just stick that, John Doe of the poorhouse was interred in the marsh, or the swamp cemetery, which is actually one of the cases. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of water that accumulates here, which might be why it was described as a failed apple orchard. And one of the stories, all this water pressure as it comes off these hillsides, unless there's proper irrigation, you would look at, root rot. An orchard wouldn't be able to thrive here. While it does have a south-facing slope, poor irrigation would be damning for any type of apple orchard. So, I believe that at this point we are at the furthest extent of the cemetery. We have a cut that runs down here. You can see, again, the irrigation issues. Water runs down, pushes through, finds a weak spot underneath roots of trees, and then just gushes out the other side. But we look up, we can see a larger gut. And then if you look out, we're almost in a bowl shape. Right to the center of the screen. And this is something that you would see as with a landslide, not landslide, but landslip, is that the looser material on top would come out further and spread out. The heavier material would gather at the top. And so you would get this rounded feature, and then it would be flat on the back. But we'll look down here. Slowly pan there some of the water. And here we have this nice, large, flat land feature. And I'm not one for dendrology or dendrochronology. I don't have that capability. But I can go, hey, these trees don't look like they've been here since 1884. So this is relatively new growth. And that would be something to be expected if this land had been cleared. Maybe if they possibly took down the layers of soil to remove those that were interred, it would involve the removal of trees. Or it could have just been where it was maintained for so long as a burying ground that there were no trees within its boundaries. So we'll take one last walk through it. I know this is a longer video, but it's one that I've been meaning to do for some time. This isn't exactly the most accessible area due to it either being snow covered or rain covered or briar covered. But I think it's important because there's always the possibility that, with further technology and as this area opens up to more tourism, that, what if the headstone is found? What if, a body is found? We have to be able to link that event to history. But if we completely disregard that this was ever a county burying ground, then we remove the possibility of saying that this was possibly an inmate of the county infirmary. So it's just a way of documenting what was. That way, if the history ever comes back and looks at us, we can say that's who you are. But right now we're at the furthest extent that we can access without tearing ourselves to shreds and down trees and brambles. So again, this is what we believe to be the old Infirmary Cemetery in Scioto County, Ohio. We're just off of US 52, and you can see the hills of Kentucky there in the background. But thank you all for hanging in with me for the last 15 minutes. Hope you have a great day. Bye.